that we've talked about. And so do you have any feelings or thoughts on, this notion of, okay, we see people who may have participated in this, but the same people will not talk about what the problems are that brought us to this place and don't want to really dig into that.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. I think I've seen several places. So these, again, aren't my original thoughts in this case, but several places where people say, you really should flip the script, right? You can't say, I know racism is terrible, but it really is a shame, that they're going after and destroying these buildings and the property and looting, right? You have to flip the script and say, I know it's a shame that they're destroying some buildings, and I don't agree with that. However, racism is horrible, and it has brought us to this moment. So it's kind of a shifting of what we focus on. And I think that's essential. If you are simply talking about the property damage or the violence or the other types of, expressions of anger that we have been seeing around the world, not only in our country, if you're only talking about that and refusing to address the unjust systems that created the need for this kind of response, then it does kind of baffle me, because it's so obvious then that you're only addressing the symptoms and not the root cause. And again, going back to the story of Jesus in the temple, Jesus has preached and taught and healed, and he goes into the temple, which is the place where, it was believed the Spirit of God was in the temple. It was like the sacred and holy place where God was with us on earth. And he says, no, you don't get to do this. You don't get to sell. And it had to do with, he was really angry. The unjust system it had to do with the money changers. Basically, you could only give certain things. You could only make sacrifice in the temple by using temple money, essentially. And so you'd have to change your regular money for temple money. And there was extraordinary exchange rates, and people were often then really cheated out of a lot of their resources. And so, he goes in and he says, you've made this, the system is the problem. It's not, I've addressed a lot of the symptoms that I've seen and a lot of the issues that I've seen, but now I have to address the system in and of itself. And so again, if we're not looking at the systemic issues, then we're missing a huge part of what is going on, the reality, and therefore how to address it and solve it. And so you have to look at both. And for anybody, Christian or anybody, who ignores the root of the problem, I think they are part of the problem. In that moment, they're being part of the problem.
Deconstructing Dallas, Ryan Trimble, Shawn Williams. We're visiting with Elizabeth Moseley of Highland Park United Methodist Church here on our Where Do We Go From Here series. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Deconstructing Dallas, Ryan Trimble, Shawn Williams. Shawn, grateful to be joined today by Elizabeth Moseley once again. Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you a question. Shame on us. We have had 4 gentlemen on our series, but you were the first woman and the first female faith leader. So I wanted to ask you, what is the female perspective on this event? And how do female faith leaders, women faith leaders, play a different role in all of this?
I think that being a woman, a faith leader in particular, but But just being a woman, I mean, I think that there is the opportunity for a lot of intersectionality when it comes to issues of gender and issues of race. From what I have done, from what I've read and some studying that I have done on this, Black women struggle in significant ways more than white women. And if we're not talking then about both issues of gender and issues of race, then we're not addressing, again, the root problems where they lie. And we're leaving out big portions of our population. So as a woman in a still male-dominated field, I have faced a lot of sexism and aggressive or sexist comments, even inadvertent. And by that, I mean, there's not the intent to harm, but the words and the way they're said and the fact they're said to me as a woman is harmful. And so I've faced that in my own experience, my own profession, again, being a minority kind of person in this field, in the field of ministry. But I also know that, the history of women's rights in our country has not always intersected well with race, with the history of racial reconciliation. So the women's rights movement, and even, way back in the beginning where it started, it kind of focused very much primarily, if not exclusively, on white women. And that was part of the strategy, honestly, in terms of moving it forward. However, that then again isn't true feminism, right? It isn't true social action on behalf of women if you leave out certain women.
Right.
And so what I feel now as a woman who has, again, experienced discrimination in just in my position as a whole, is I can't ignore and I can't pretend like I know everything that a Black woman has experienced or is feeling, and I can't speak for all women. And if in my own work around gender equality, I am not also then addressing racial inequality, then I am not doing my job. And that conviction again has been growing in me over the past several years. And so I have started doing more work around that. And I'll tell you, it is difficult to not have a defense mechanism, a kind of a defensiveness around some of the understanding and the nuance to this conversation, because it is so easy as a woman to say, well, I know what it's like to be discriminated against. And while I do, to some degree, I still don't know anything close to the full degree of how some women of color, and particularly women who are Black, are discriminated against. And so to have to take a step back and say, okay, my, woman card does not entitle me to know everything and claim everything. So that's been a big part of my own journey and my own learning around my gender and around my race. I mean, the fact that I am a white woman gives me a lot more power and security by far than women who are Black or other women of color.
I wanted to focus a little bit on the church And obviously, we're here in the Bible Belt and in the South. We love our religion, Christianity being the main religion. And at the same time, we know that this is a place specifically in the South where slavery flourished. And after that, Jim Crow flourished. And so here we are today. And I wonder, how can white churches work to continue to overcome this history that supported this silence and instituted some of these mistreatment areas where Black Americans were mistreated? Like, how does the church continue to push through that and become more of an agent for change?
I think that's a great question, because I think there are two different ways you can look at it. And there's probably lots of ways. Just off the top of my head, there are a couple. The first is you can look at what a church is doing with its money and with its mission. And that means looking at where churches give and how they are active in their community. You can look at where churches, how they send and kind of mobilize their people to go out into the communities and how they do that, right? So kind of where they go and how they articulate that kind of mission and work. And that is a place that I think a lot of churches need to look at, right? A lot of churches, especially white churches, need to look at how they are spending their money in the community for causes in the community, or to create mission opportunities in their community, and where are they going? Who are they serving with? And, just an example of that kind of how nuanced this is it's so important, I think, for a lot of churches. And really, I would say this is across the board with any nonprofit or any individual, really. I mean, the idea is not to go and serve others or to go and do ministry to people, but the idea should be that you do ministry with people, that you are in community, in relationship with individuals, and you are therefore listening to them and learning from them. And the ministry and the mission work that you do is integrated into the communities where you are doing that kind of work. It's not, a white church like swooping in and deciding what is needed. It is a white church listening to the communities where it wants to have an impact and listening to know what they are asking for. And so we, in the United Methodist Church in particular, especially in the North Texas Conference, have really emphasized ministry with people as opposed to ministry to people. So that's one way I think that churches, again, white churches, need to be very thoughtful and critical. Remember, being critical of something, in my opinion, does not mean that you hate that thing or you don't like that thing. It actually is a result of a deep affinity for, a deep love for something. If we're critical of something, often it comes from a place of deep caring. We want this to be better. So I would encourage, any member of any institution, really, but certainly if you are a member of a white church, I would encourage you to be very thoughtful and to ask questions about where that church's finances, the money, the resources, human resources, all sorts of things. Where are they going and how are they going there? How is that church kind of in connection with the people and the areas that they want to serve? So that's one way that I think churches can respond to this. The second is to speak directly to it from their platforms. And that includes in the pulpit, and that includes on social media. And I think this is the harder one. This is the one that is the most difficult, because this is where you are directly countering and confronting people kind of in their individual states. And by that, I mean, you might preach or speak to a group of 100, 200, thousands, however many people hear you preach or speak, but you're speaking to them as individuals. And it's very difficult to preach and speak, I think, in a way that kind of addresses every single person's issues or defense or perspective or way that they might approach this. And so you can get a lot of pushback when you speak on issues like race, when you speak on other issues of human inequality and human rights and justice issues, because you're speaking to people in this individual state that they are in.